The first thing Daniel noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence that fills a home after a long day, the kind that feels warm and safe. This silence felt different. Heavy, uncomfortable, like something in the room was watching him. Daniel Carter stood in the doorway of his own living room, his briefcase still in his hand, staring at the empty couch where his wife usually sat in the evenings. The television was off, the lights were dim, and the house felt strangely unfamiliar. He checked his watch. 6:42 p.m. Emily should have been home hours ago. For 5 years, their routine had been almost identical. Daniel finished work at the architecture firm around 6. Emily, who worked remotely as a graphic designer, was almost always home before him. Most days she greeted him at the door with a smile and a quick kiss. Sometimes she teased him about working too much. Sometimes she dragged him to the kitchen to taste something she had cooked. But tonight, nothing. Daniel loosened his tie and stepped inside. "Emily," he called. His voice echoed faintly down the hallway. No answer. He placed his briefcase on the table and walked through the house slowly. The kitchen was spotless. The bedroom door was slightly open. The bathroom light was off. Finally, he heard the faint sound of the front door opening behind him. He turned. Emily stepped inside, slightly out of breath. Her long brown hair was messy, and she looked startled when she saw him. "Oh, you're home already," she said. Daniel frowned slightly. "Already? It's almost 7. She forced a quick smile. "Yeah, I just went out for a walk." Daniel studied her face. Something about her expression felt off, but he didn't push it. Instead, he smiled gently. "Rough day." She nodded quickly. "Just tired." Then she walked past him toward the kitchen. And somehow, that was the moment the tiny crack appeared in Daniel's perfect marriage. Daniel and Emily Carter had what most people called a perfect relationship. They met 8 years earlier at a coffee shop in Chicago. Daniel had been working on architectural sketches while drinking his third espresso. Emily had accidentally spilled her coffee on his notebook. She had panicked. He had laughed. That moment turned into a conversation. The conversation turned into dinner. Dinner turned into love. 3 years later, they were married. Emily was warm, creative, and full of life. Daniel was calm, thoughtful, and deeply loyal. Together they built a quiet, happy life in a suburban neighborhood outside the city. Friday movie nights, Sunday morning pancakes, late night conversations about dreams and plans. They trusted each other completely. Or at least, Daniel thought they did. It started with tiny things, small enough to ignore, small enough to explain away. But once Daniel noticed them, he couldn't stop seeing them. One evening, while they were watching television together, Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then quickly flipped it face down. Daniel didn't think much of it. But 30 seconds later, she picked it up and walked into the hallway. He could hear her whispering softly. When she came back, she smiled awkwardly. "Just my friend Jessica," she said. Daniel nodded. But something about the way she avoided eye contact made his stomach tighten. Over the next few weeks, more things changed. Emily started taking more walks, sometimes late at night, sometimes early in the morning. Her phone was always with her. Even in the bathroom, she laughed less, talked less, and sometimes Daniel caught her staring into space like she was somewhere else entirely. One night he asked gently, "Is everything okay?" Emily looked up quickly. "Of course. You seem distracted lately." She forced a smile. "Just work stress." Daniel believed her. Or at least, he tried to. 2 weeks later, Daniel came home earlier than usual. It had been a long day at the office, and he decided to leave early. When he pulled into the driveway, something strange caught his attention. A car, a black sedan, parked across the street. The engine was running. Daniel frowned slightly. He stepped out of his car and walked toward the house. As soon as the front door opened, the black sedan drove away. Daniel paused. A strange feeling crept into his chest. Inside the house, Emily was sitting on the couch. Her cheeks were slightly flushed. "You're home early," she said quickly. Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, finished early today." He glanced toward the window, then back at her. Did someone stop by? Emily hesitated. Just for a second. Then she shook her head. No, why? Daniel forced a smile. No reason. But deep inside, something didn't feel right. Over the next few days, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling. Every small detail started to bother him. The late-night texting, the sudden walks, the nervous smiles. He hated himself for thinking the worst. Emily wasn't that kind of person. She loved him. He knew she did. But doubt has a strange way of growing. Quietly, slowly, like a shadow spreading across the floor. One night, Daniel sat alone in the living room while Emily slept upstairs. The television flickered silently. His mind raced with thoughts. He hated what he was about to consider. It felt wrong, like crossing a line you can never uncross. But the uncertainty was worse. Finally, he whispered to himself, I just need to know. The next day, during his lunch break, Daniel walked into an electronics store. He browsed the shelves quietly. Security cameras, smart home systems, tiny recording devices. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up a small hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector. The box was light, too light for something that might destroy his life. The cashier scanned it. Home security? The man asked casually. Daniel forced a small smile. Yeah, something like that. That evening, Emily left for another walk. Daniel waited until her car disappeared down the street. Then he opened the box. His heart pounded as he climbed a small ladder in the living room. The camera faced the couch, the front door, the hallway, almost the entire house. He connected it to his phone. The live feed appeared instantly. His own empty living room stared back at him. Daniel swallowed hard. He whispered quietly to himself, Please, let this be nothing. But deep down, he wasn't sure he wanted the truth anymore. Because sometimes, the truth destroys everything. The camera was on, and within 48 hours, Daniel would see something that would shatter his entire world. The first night, Daniel barely slept. The small camera in the living room was connected directly to an app on his phone. Every movement inside the house would trigger a notification. He placed the phone on the bedside table. Face up, volume on. Emily slept beside him, her breathing slow and steady. Daniel stared at the ceiling. He felt guilty, deeply guilty. Spying on the person you love most in the world felt like betrayal in itself. But the doubt in his chest refused to disappear. And doubt is a powerful thing. It whispers questions your mind cannot ignore. At 9:13 a.m. the next morning, Daniel was sitting in his office reviewing architectural plans when his phone vibrated. A notification popped up. His heart skipped. He immediately opened the app. The live feed appeared. The living room looked exactly the same as always. Sunlight poured through the windows. The couch, the coffee table, the hallway. Then Emily walked into frame. Daniel felt relief wash over him. She was just walking through the living room, carrying her laptop and a cup of coffee. She sat down on the couch and began working. Normal. Everything looked completely normal. Daniel leaned back in his chair and exhaled. See, he whispered to himself. You're being paranoid. For the next 2 hours, the camera occasionally sent small notifications. Emily walking to the kitchen. Emily returning to the couch. Emily answering a phone call. Everything looked ordinary. Daniel almost laughed at himself. Maybe he really had overreacted. Maybe stress had gotten into his head. But then, at 1:47 p.m., the notification came again. Daniel opened the app. Emily was standing near the window, looking outside. Her body language was different. Tense. Almost nervous. She checked her phone. Then she walked to the front door and unlocked it. Daniel frowned. A few seconds later, the door opened, and someone walked in. The camera didn't capture the person's face clearly at first. Only a tall silhouette stepping inside the house. Daniel's chest tightened. The man closed the door quietly. Emily immediately wrapped her arms around him. Daniel froze. The office around him disappeared. The sound of keyboards and conversations faded away. All he could see was the screen. Emily was hugging another man in their living room. Not the kind of quick, friendly hug you give a neighbor. This was different. Long. Intimate. Her face was buried in the man's shoulder. Daniel's fingers trembled around the phone. "No," he whispered. Daniel replayed the moment again. And again. And again. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe a cousin. Maybe someone she hadn't mentioned. But then the man pulled back and gently touched Emily's face. Daniel's stomach dropped. There was no mistaking it now. The man leaned forward and kissed her. Daniel felt like the air had been ripped out of his lungs. His heart pounded violently. His vision blurred. Around him, his co-workers continued their normal workday. No one knew that his entire life had just shattered on a small phone screen. For the next 20 minutes, Daniel couldn't look away, even though every second hurt more than the last. The man and Emily sat on the couch together. They laughed. They talked. At one point, she rested her head on his shoulder. The same couch where she used to fall asleep watching movies with Daniel. The same couch where they had celebrated their anniversary. The same couch where they had planned their future. Daniel felt something break inside his chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just disbelief. His mind kept searching for an explanation. This couldn't be real. Emily wouldn't do this. She loved him. She told him every day. But the camera never lies. And the camera showed everything. Eventually the camera caught the man's face clearly. Daniel paused the footage, zoomed in, studied the image. He didn't recognize him. Mid-30s. Dark hair. Clean cut. Confident posture. Someone who looked completely comfortable inside Daniel's house. Daniel's house. Daniel's marriage. The thought made his hands shake. Then the footage showed something Daniel would never forget. Emily stood up and walked toward the hallway. The man followed her. Before leaving the camera's view, Emily turned around. She looked directly toward the living room, toward the camera. For a moment Daniel thought she somehow knew, but she was only checking the room, making sure no one was there. Then she smiled at the man, a smile Daniel hadn't seen in weeks, and they disappeared down the hallway toward the bedroom. Daniel dropped his phone on the desk. He couldn't breathe. He felt like someone had punched a hole through his chest. His mind screamed at him to stop watching. But another part of him forced his hand back to the phone. He needed to know. He needed to see the truth completely, no matter how much it hurt. The camera showed an empty living room for almost an hour. Daniel stared at the screen the entire time. His brain replayed every moment of the last few months. The late walks, the secret phone calls, the distant smiles. All the pieces suddenly fit together, and the realization crushed him. Emily hadn't been drifting away from him. She had been moving towards someone else. Finally, the bedroom door opened. Emily and the man walked back into the living room. Emily looked relaxed, happy. The man kissed her again before leaving. She walked him to the front door. Before he stepped outside, he whispered something. The camera couldn't capture the audio clearly, but Daniel could read Emily's lips. "Tomorrow." She nodded. Then the man left. Emily closed the door slowly. For a moment, she stood there silently. Then she walked to the couch and sat down. She picked up her phone and began texting. Daniel knew exactly who she was texting. Daniel stood up slowly. His legs felt weak. He grabbed his jacket and walked toward the office exit. One of his co-workers called after him. "Hey Daniel, leaving early?" Daniel forced a small nod. "Yeah, not feeling well." Which was technically true. His entire world had just collapsed. The drive home felt surreal. Traffic lights, passing cars, radio playing softly. Everything looked normal. But Daniel felt like he was moving through a different reality. His wife had betrayed him. Inside their home. Inside their marriage. And she had no idea he knew. When Daniel finally pulled into the driveway, Emily's car was already there. He sat in the car for a long time, just staring at the house. The same house where they had built 5 years of memories. The same house where he had proposed to her in the living room. The same house where she had just betrayed him hours earlier. Finally, he whispered to himself, "What do I do now?" Because sometimes, the hardest part isn't discovering the truth. It's deciding what to do with it. Daniel now knows the truth, but Emily still believes her secret is safe. And soon, Daniel will meet the man who destroyed his marriage. Face to face, Daniel sat in his car outside the house for nearly 15 minutes before finally opening the door. The late afternoon sun reflected off the windows of the home he once considered the safest place in his life. Now it felt different, cold, unfamiliar, like he was about to walk into a stranger's house. He stepped out slowly and walked to the front door. His hand hovered over the handle for a moment. Inside that house was the woman he loved, and the woman who had just broken him. Daniel inhaled deeply and opened the door. Emily was in the kitchen when he walked in. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, you're home early." The sound of her voice almost shattered him, because it sounded so normal, so warm, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't spent the afternoon in their living room with another man. Daniel forced himself to remain calm. "Yeah," he said quietly, setting his keys down. "Left work early." She walked over and kissed him on the cheek. Daniel's body stiffened for a split second. Her lips, the same lips that had kissed someone else just hours earlier. He swallowed the anger rising in his throat. "Everything okay?" she asked. Daniel nodded slowly. "Just tired." She smiled softly. "Dinner will be ready soon." And just like that, Emily turned back to the stove, humming softly, as if their marriage hadn't just collapsed. Daniel walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. The same couch he had watched on camera earlier that day. The same couch where she had been with him. His chest tightened. He could almost see the scene replaying in his mind. The hug, the kiss, the laughter. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. If Emily noticed anything strange about him, she didn't show it. Dinner felt like a performance. Two actors pretending everything was fine. Emily talked about a design project she was working on. Daniel nodded occasionally, but most of the time he was silent, studying her. Every smile, every glance, every tiny movement. He wondered how long she had been lying to him. Weeks? Months? Maybe longer. Finally, she noticed his quietness. "You're really quiet tonight," she said gently. Daniel shrugged. "Just a long day." Emily reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Try to relax." Her touch sent a strange feeling through him. Not warmth, not comfort, just confusion. How could the same person who betrayed him still act so loving? Later that night, Emily went upstairs to shower. Daniel remained on the couch. His phone vibrated. Motion detected. Living room camera. Daniel frowned. He opened the app. The camera showed Emily walking back into the living room, wrapped in a towel. She grabbed her phone from the coffee table. Then she started typing quickly. Daniel zoomed in slightly. He couldn't read the exact message, but he could see the name at the top of the conversation. Ryan, the man from earlier. Daniel's stomach twisted. Emily smiled faintly while texting. Then she typed something else. A moment later, she held the phone up to her ear. She was calling him. Daniel watched the footage silently as she spoke in a soft voice. "I miss you already," she said. The words felt like knives. Daniel clenched his jaw. Emily laughed quietly at something Ryan said. "Tomorrow again?" she asked. Pause. Then she nodded. "Okay, same time." Daniel's grip tightened around the phone. Tomorrow. They were planning to meet again. Inside his house, Daniel stared at the camera feed long after Emily went upstairs. The first time he saw the footage, he felt shock. Now, the shock was turning into something else. Cold determination. He needed to know everything. Who Ryan was. How long this had been happening. Why Emily had done this. And most importantly, what he was going to do next. Daniel opened his laptop. He replayed the footage again, this time carefully, studying every frame. Eventually, he paused on a clear image of the man's face. Ryan. Daniel took a screenshot. Then he did something he never thought he would do. He searched the internet. It didn't take long. A reverse image search. A few social media platforms. Then finally, Daniel found him. Ryan Mitchell, age 34. Real estate agent. Worked in downtown Chicago. Daniel scrolled through the profile slowly. Photos of Ryan at parties. Photos with friends. Photos in expensive suits. Then Daniel saw something that made his heart sink even further. One of the pictures showed Ryan standing inside a familiar neighborhood street. Daniel recognized it immediately. Ryan had been in their neighborhood before. More than once. which meant this wasn't new. Ryan had been part of Emily's life longer than Daniel realized. Daniel continued searching. Eventually, he found Emily's public profile. He scrolled through months of posts, pictures of vacations, pictures of dinners, pictures of Daniel and Emily smiling together. A perfect marriage on the surface. Then he checked the comments. And there it was. Ryan's name. Under an old photo. Ryan Mitchell. Looks amazing. Wish I could have been there. Emily had replied. Maybe next time, winking face. The comment was 6 months old. Daniel felt his stomach drop. 6 months. Maybe longer. The betrayal suddenly felt deeper. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Emily lay peacefully beside him, her breathing slow and steady. Daniel stared into the darkness. His mind replayed every memory they shared. Their wedding, their honeymoon, the night they moved into this house. Had she already been lying back then? Had their love ever been real? Or had he simply never seen the truth? At 3:12 a.m., Daniel quietly got out of bed. He walked downstairs and sat in the living room. The hidden camera stared down from the ceiling. Silent. Watching everything. Daniel looked up at it, then whispered quietly, "Tomorrow." Because tomorrow, Ryan was coming back, and Daniel would be ready. Tomorrow afternoon, Ryan will return to Daniel's house. But this time, Daniel won't be watching from his office. He'll be there, waiting. Daniel woke up before the alarm. 5:38 a.m. The room was still dark. Emily was sleeping peacefully beside him, her head resting on the pillow, her hair spread softly across the blanket. For a moment, Daniel simply stared at her. There was a time when waking up next to her felt like the best part of his life. Now it felt like staring at a stranger. His chest felt hollow. The love was still there somewhere, buried under layers of confusion, anger, and heartbreak. But the trust? That was gone. And without trust, love becomes something fragile, something painful. Daniel quietly slipped out of bed. Today was the day. In the kitchen, Daniel poured himself a cup of coffee and opened his phone. The hidden camera app showed the empty living room. Quiet. Still. Everything looked normal. But Daniel knew what would happen later. Ryan would come again. Just like yesterday. Except today, Daniel wouldn't be miles away watching a screen. Today he would be inside the house, watching with his own eyes. Emily came downstairs around 7:30 a.m. She smiled when she saw him. Morning. Daniel forced a small smile. Morning. She kissed him lightly on the cheek and poured herself coffee. Busy day today? She asked. Daniel nodded. Yeah. Long meeting this afternoon. Emily glanced at him quickly, then nodded. Same here. I'll probably just stay home and work. Daniel almost laughed. The lie was so effortless, so casual, but he didn't react. He simply finished his coffee and grabbed his keys. I'll see you tonight. Emily smiled warmly. Love you. Daniel paused for half a second, then said quietly, Love you too. The words tasted bitter. At 8:05 a.m., Daniel pulled his car out of the driveway. He drove down the street, turned the corner, then parked 2 blocks away. His hands trembled slightly as he turned off the engine. This was the moment, the point where everything would change forever. He walked back through a small alley behind the houses until he reached the back of his own property. The back door was rarely used. Emily never locked it during the day. Daniel slowly opened it and stepped inside. The house was quiet. Emily was upstairs, probably working on her laptop. Daniel moved silently into the guest bedroom. It was the only room where he could watch the living room without being seen. From there, he could hear the front door and the hallway. Now all he had to do was wait. Waiting can be torture. Minutes feel like hours. Every sound feels amplified. Daniel sat in the chair near the guest room door, staring at the floor. He could hear Emily moving around upstairs occasionally. Her footsteps, the creak of the floorboards. At 10:17 a.m., she walked downstairs. Daniel held his breath. She entered the kitchen, opened the fridge, then walked into the living room. Daniel slowly opened the hidden camera feed on his phone. The screen showed Emily sitting on the couch, looking at her phone. Then she smiled. A small, excited smile. Daniel knew exactly why. Emily typed something quickly. A moment later, Daniel saw her lips move. Okay. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside. The same nervous movement Daniel had seen on the camera yesterday. Then she unlocked the front door. Daniel's heart started pounding. It was happening. At 10:32 a.m. There was a knock. 2 short taps. Emily opened the door immediately. Ryan stepped inside. Daniel could see him clearly through the small gap in the guest room door. The same man from the footage. Same confident posture. Same relaxed smile. Ryan closed the door behind him. Emily didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around him. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Even though he had already seen it on camera, watching it in person felt far worse. Ryan kissed her. Longer this time. More confidently. Like he belonged there. Inside Daniel's house. Ryan laughed softly. Miss me? Emily nodded. Always. Daniel felt something inside him snap. Ryan and Emily walked into the living room together. They sat on the couch. Exactly like the day before. Ryan leaned back comfortably. Your husband at work? He asked. Emily nodded. Yeah. He won't be back until tonight. Ryan smirked. Good. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. The casual disrespect felt like acid in his chest. Ryan leaned closer to Emily. You know, he said quietly. One day you won't have to hide like this. Emily hesitated slightly. What do you mean? Ryan shrugged. You deserve better than this. Daniel's heart pounded louder. Better than this? Ryan continued. A guy who actually understands you. Emily looked conflicted. I don't know. Ryan reached for her hand. You know you want this. Daniel had heard enough. The guest room door opened slowly. Ryan and Emily both turned. Their faces froze. Daniel stepped into the living room. The silence was immediate. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Emily's face turned pale. Daniel. Ryan stood up quickly. What the hell? Daniel raised his hand slightly. Don't. His voice was calm. Too calm. Emily's eyes filled with panic. You're supposed to be at work. Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah. Then he looked directly at Ryan. So you must be Ryan. Ryan looked confused. How do you? Daniel held up his phone. The camera footage paused on the screen. Ryan kissing Emily. Inside the living room. Ryan's face went pale. Emily's entire body froze. Daniel's voice remained quiet. Almost emotionless. I've been watching for 2 days. The room fell into complete silence. Emily's lips trembled. Ryan looked like he wanted to disappear. Daniel stared at both of them. The people who had just destroyed his life. And for the first time, the anger began to rise. The truth is now exposed. But the most painful part is still coming. Because sometimes, the confrontation hurts even more than the betrayal. The room felt frozen in time. Daniel stood near the hallway. Emily sat on the couch, pale and trembling. Ryan stood awkwardly beside the coffee table, unsure where to look. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence itself felt louder than shouting. Daniel's eyes slowly moved from Ryan to Emily, the woman he had trusted more than anyone in the world, the woman who had promised forever. And now, the woman sitting in front of him with another man. Finally, Emily whispered, Daniel, I can explain. Daniel let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Explain? He lifted the phone slightly, showing the paused footage again. You want to explain this? Emily's lips trembled. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's voice remained calm, but there was something cold underneath it. How long? Emily looked down. She didn't answer. Daniel repeated the question, this time louder. How long, Emily? Her eyes filled with tears. For months. The number hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. For months. For months of lies. For months of pretending. For months of kissing him goodnight while secretly meeting another man. Daniel nodded slowly. For months. He looked around the living room. This house, our home, you brought him here for 4 months. Emily started crying. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Daniel's eyes flashed with pain. How did you mean for it to happen? She struggled to find words. Ryan finally spoke. Look, man, maybe we should just talk. Daniel's head snapped toward him. Don't. His voice was sharp now. Cold. Ryan immediately fell silent. Daniel walked closer to the couch. Each step felt heavy. Did you know she was married? Daniel asked Ryan. Ryan hesitated. Yeah. Daniel laughed quietly again. A humorless laugh. Of course you did. He rubbed his forehead slowly. Of course. Emily wiped tears from her cheeks. Daniel, please just listen. Daniel stared at her. I'm listening. She took a shaky breath. It started with work stress. We were arguing a lot. You were always busy. Daniel frowned. Busy. Emily nodded. You were always working late. Always focused on projects. We stopped talking the way we used to.
No
Daniel
way,
felt
this
anger
can't
rise
be
in his
real.
chest. So you cheated? Emily shook her head desperately. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Ryan looked uncomfortable hearing the conversation. Daniel turned back to him. And you? Ryan shrugged slightly. I care about her. Daniel's jaw tightened. You care about her? Ryan nodded. Daniel pointed around the room. You cared so much you helped destroy her marriage. Ryan didn't answer. Daniel looked back at Emily. His voice suddenly softened. But the softness felt far more painful. Do you love him? The question hung in the air. Heavy. Emily looked at Ryan. Then back at Daniel. Tears streamed down her face. I don't know. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. That answer hurt more than a yes. Because it meant something worse. Confusion. Uncertainty. Daniel opened his eyes again. You used to know, he said quietly. You used to know you loved me. Emily cried harder. I still care about you. Daniel shook his head slowly. Care. He whispered the word like it was poison. Care isn't love, Emily. Ryan shifted again.
Oh my
Look,
God,
maybe
is
I should
that
just leave.
real?
Daniel turned toward him slowly. Yes. Ryan grabbed his jacket from the chair. But before leaving, he looked at Emily. Call me later. That sentence made something inside Daniel explode. Get out. Ryan froze. Daniel stepped closer. Get out. Ryan didn't argue. He walked quickly to the door and left the house. The door closed. Now it was just Daniel and Emily. The two people who once promised to spend their lives together. Emily sobbed quietly on the couch. Daniel stood across the room. The distance between them felt enormous, even though they were only a few steps apart. Finally, Emily whispered, I'm sorry. Daniel stared at her. You're sorry you got caught. Emily shook her head. No. I'm sorry I hurt you. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. You didn't just hurt me. He gestured around the house. You destroyed everything we built. Emily cried harder. I didn't want to lose you. Daniel looked stunned. You already did. The truth landed heavily in the room. Emily covered her face with her hands. Daniel's anger slowly faded, leaving only exhaustion and heartbreak. Daniel sat down on the chair across from her. His voice became quiet again, almost empty. Why didn't you just tell me you were unhappy? Emily sniffed. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of losing you. Daniel shook his head slowly. You lost me anyway. The words felt final, like the closing of a door. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The house felt painfully quiet. Finally, Daniel stood up. I think you should go stay somewhere else tonight. Emily looked up in shock. Daniel, I need space. His voice wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Emily slowly stood up. She walked upstairs to pack a small bag. Daniel remained in the living room, staring at the couch, staring at the place where his marriage had ended. Emily is leaving the house, but the emotional damage has only begun. Because the hardest part of betrayal isn't the moment it happens. The sound of the zipper closing upstairs echoed through the house. Daniel sat alone in the living room. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stared at the couch in front of him. The same couch where he had once fallen asleep with Emily during movie nights. The same couch where they had laughed, argued, made plans for their future. And now, the same couch where another man had sat with his wife. The memories felt poisoned. Every corner of the room suddenly felt unfamiliar. Upstairs, he heard Emily's footsteps moving back and forth. Closets opening, drawers sliding, small pieces of their shared life being packed into a bag. Daniel leaned forward and rubbed his face slowly. His chest felt tight, like something heavy was pressing down on him. Not anger. Not anymore. Just a deep, aching sadness. A few minutes later, Emily walked down the stairs with a small suitcase. Her eyes were red from crying. Her hair messy. She looked nothing like the confident, smiling woman Daniel had fallen in love with years ago. She stopped near the doorway to the living room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emily whispered, "Daniel." He didn't look up. "Yes." Her voice trembled. "I'm really sorry." Daniel nodded slowly, but he still didn't look at her, because he knew if he looked at her face again, it might break him completely. Emily waited, maybe hoping he would say something more, but he didn't. The silence stretched painfully. Finally, she asked quietly, "Is this really the end?" Daniel finally looked up. His eyes were tired. "Hello. I don't know." Emily's lips trembled again. "But it feels like it." Emily hesitated near the door. Then she asked something softly. "Did you ever stop loving me?" The question caught Daniel off guard. He stared at her for several seconds. Then he answered honestly, "No." Emily's tears started again. Daniel continued quietly, "But love doesn't survive without trust." Emily lowered her head, because she knew he was right. Emily picked up her suitcase. She walked slowly toward the door. Before opening it, she looked back one last time. Daniel was still sitting in the same chair, looking exhausted, broken. The man she once promised forever. "I never meant to hurt you like this," she whispered. Daniel didn't respond. Because there was nothing left to say, Emily opened the door and stepped outside. The door closed softly behind her. The silence that followed felt overwhelming. Daniel sat there for a long time. Minutes. Maybe hours. The house felt bigger now. Colder. Every sound echoed differently. The ticking of the clock. The faint hum of the refrigerator. Even his own breathing sounded louder. Finally, Daniel stood up and walked slowly around the living room. His eyes landed on the hidden camera mounted near the ceiling. The device that had revealed everything. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he climbed onto a chair and removed it. The small camera felt incredibly light in his hand, but it had carried the weight of the truth. Daniel placed it on the table and sat down again. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He walked through the house slowly. Every room held memories. The kitchen where Emily had danced while cooking. The hallway where they once hung their wedding photos. The bedroom where they had whispered about their future. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. His mind replayed the past over and over. But now every memory felt different. Like a beautiful picture that had suddenly cracked. He wondered when things had started falling apart. Had he missed the signs? Had he been too focused on work? Too distracted to notice she was unhappy? The questions filled his head endlessly. But none of them changed the truth. Emily had chosen someone else. At 2:47 a.m., Daniel's phone vibrated on the nightstand. He glanced at the screen. A text message. From Emily. He hesitated for several seconds before opening it. The message was short. "Emily, I'm staying at Jessica's tonight. I just want you to know, despite everything, those years with you were the happiest of my life." Daniel stared at the message. His chest tightened again. Part of him wanted to respond. Part of him wanted to ask 1,000 questions. But another part of him knew. Some things couldn't be fixed with words anymore. He placed the phone back down. Without replying, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. The darkness felt endless. Hours passed slowly. The weight of loneliness settled over him. Not just the loss of Emily, but the loss of the future he thought they would have. The family they planned. The years they imagined growing old together. All gone. Destroyed by one decision. One secret. One betrayal. Finally, as the first light of morning began to appear through the window, Daniel whispered quietly to himself, "Trust is fragile. Once it breaks, it never returns the same." Emily is gone. The house is empty. But the story isn't over yet. Because sometimes the deepest pain comes after the silence, when the reality truly settles in. The morning sunlight crept slowly through the living room windows. Daniel hadn't slept. Not even for a minute. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The house felt painfully quiet. For years, mornings had always started the same way. Emily humming softly in the kitchen. The smell of pancakes or toast. Small conversations about their plans for the day. Now, there was nothing. Just silence. And the empty chair across the table. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then his phone vibrated again. Another message from Emily. Emily, can we talk one more time? Just once. I need to say a few things. Daniel looked at the message. His first instinct was to ignore it. Part of him didn't want to reopen the wound. But another part of him needed closure. Needed answers. After a long pause, he typed a short reply. Daniel, come by at noon. The next few hours felt strange. Daniel cleaned the house. Not because it needed cleaning, but because he needed something to do. Something to keep his mind from replaying the same painful images again and again. The couch. The kiss. The lies. At exactly 12:03 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Daniel stood still for a moment, then walked over and opened it. Emily stood outside. She looked exhausted, her eyes swollen from crying. She held no suitcase this time, just her phone in her hand. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Finally, Daniel stepped aside. Come in. Emily walked slowly into the living room. She looked around the house, like she was seeing it differently now, maybe realizing what she had lost. Daniel sat down in the chair across from the couch. Emily remained standing for a moment, then sat down. The distance between them felt enormous, even though they were only a few feet apart. The truth. Emily took a deep breath. I owe you the truth. Daniel nodded slightly. Yes, you do. Emily wiped her eyes. Ryan and I met at a design conference 5 months ago. Daniel listened quietly. He was easy to talk to. He understood the work I was doing. We kept texting after the conference. Daniel's voice was calm. When did it stop being texting? Emily hesitated. About a month later. Daniel nodded slowly. So the first 4 months of our marriage this year. You were already talking to him. Emily lowered her head. Yes. Daniel stared at the floor. The pain was sharp, but somehow he had expected it. Daniel looked back up. Did you ever plan to tell me? Emily's voice was barely audible. I wanted to, but you didn't. Emily shook her head. I kept thinking I could fix things, that I could end it before you ever knew. Daniel laughed quietly. That's not fixing things. I know. Emily looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I made the worst mistake of my life. Daniel leaned back in the chair. His expression softened slightly, but the sadness remained. You know what hurts the most? Emily waited silently. It's not Ryan. She looked confused. It's the lies. Daniel continued quietly. Every morning you kissed me goodbye. Every night you said you loved me. He swallowed. All of it was built on lies. Emily started crying again. I never stopped caring about you. Daniel shook his head gently. Maybe. Then he added something quietly. But caring isn't enough to build a life. Emily wiped her face. So what happens now? Daniel looked around the room slowly. Then back at her. I think we both know the answer. Emily nodded weakly. You're right. The words hung in the air. Their marriage had officially ended. Not with screaming. Not with hatred. Just with quiet acceptance. Sometimes the quiet endings hurt the most. Emily stood up slowly. She walked toward the door again. But this time she stopped halfway. Daniel. He looked up. Yes. Emily's voice trembled. You were a good husband. Daniel gave a small, sad smile. I tried to be. Emily nodded. I know. She opened the door. Before stepping outside, she said one final sentence. I hope one day you can forgive me. Daniel didn't answer. Because forgiveness takes time. And sometimes, it never fully arrives. Emily walked out, and the door closed behind her for the last time. Daniel stood alone in the living room again. But something inside him had changed. The pain was still there, but the confusion had faded. He finally understood something important. Love is powerful, but trust is its foundation. Without trust, love slowly collapses, like a house built on sand. Daniel looked around the quiet home, then whispered to himself. Some stories don't end with happiness, but they still teach us something. And sometimes, that lesson changes us forever. The end.